1994, the start of Project Blaenau. You can see behind us the end of Volume 3 is the end of the deviation at Tanygrisiau Station.
Yeah, there's a lot we can talk about in this bit, probably more than we'd fit in one little film, because we're at the start of probably one of the biggest projects that we ever got involved in, Project Blaenau, which was about 1.5 miles of railway to reopen. But it had got as many problems in this 1.5 miles as probably most of the railway put together.
Yeah.
From certainly the track and the civil side of it. Because as we'll see later as we go further up, a lot of it is perched up on a ledge on dry stone walls, massively buttressed walls with villages built underneath them. Almost, in one case, they've actually built, I think it's a bathroom extension out the back that abuts to the railway, and probably the bath water must vibrate when a train goes past. We'll see it when we get further up. Good spot to start with here because you can actually see the change of the gradient. And we're now going uphill again. I nearly said new track, but of course, like so much of the Ffestiniog's track, we trawled second-hand markets and bought pretty good, relatively cheap rail with many years life in it. And we always considered it new, even though it was rolled in 1941, this particular stuff. You see there, the little footbridge. That's one of 4 along this section. They were strange little humpy things with, I think they were cast iron plates on them, several of them missing. That one, I recall, had some sort of plywood or something over the gap, and the coalman with a big heavy sack of coal on his back, I think it was this one, went through it. Not all the way through it, but nevertheless it collapsed. They were all rebuilt. Like so many other things on this whole project, it was split into mini projects, and one group took on the bridges, the little foot over bridges. Another group took on some of the underpasses of rebuilding them. We'll see 1 or 2 of them later on, but they were precarious little things, a little bit like we're standing on, but this one actually has a massive concrete slab underneath this huge and ornamental culvert, but it's very difficult to get down into it, and it's even more difficult to get out of it again, so I don't think we'll bother today.
No, maybe not.
Just beyond where it says unfitted train stop is the 12.25 mile post. Give you an idea exactly where we are, 12.25 miles from the buffers in Portmannock. We're actually at the site now of one of the branches, if you call them that, to the slate quarries. I mean, branches, you call them branches, some of them were pretty long. This particular one went up through several inclines and right up through Carmarthen Valley to far and distant quarries and mines. I remember before we did any work on this, the old track was here, very worn out, double head, pretty well overgrown, swampy, no drains that worked. But here was a set of points leading off, and from what I can remember, there was one went straight up to the incline up through the bridge up there, and then along, and then another incline, and there was also a couple of sidings here, which I have a strong feeling are probably still underneath this raised ground here. I don't ever remember them being lifted, and they were half buried anyway. And the interesting thing with this was at the bottom of the incline was a trap point, a derailing device, and I always thought if a wagon full of slate ran away down there and came down and got to this thing, it would derail it all right, but it would probably trip over itself and go
straight
and I'd be interested to know quite how the control between the quarry railway, if you like, and the Ffestiniog Railway passenger trains to somehow prevent a runaway slate train taking out the FR train, which wouldn't have been very good, would it? Following on from that, and we'll in a little while we'll come to a bridge that wasn't there, and in order to rebuild this bridge, which had been taken away by the council, and as we'll see when we move up to there,
Yeah.
it was eventually put back again. The putting back was done by contractors who turned what was a footpath down there into a road and established this operating area where they could set up their construction camp to take all the materials up to rebuild a bridge. And that, if those sidings are there, has kind of buried them pretty well forever. I don't know, some sort of ground penetrating radar or something might tell you something.
Yeah.
After that had been done, as part of the project Blaenau then of laying the track, this whole area was levelled out, raised a bit, and this was where we had the ballast delivered, so that we could load the ballast trains. So as we laid the track up from here, we could be ballasting it from here as well. So track was laid at the start of the project, and there was an interface there with the operating railway, and we had 2 stop blocks on the track, one with a key on the token for that section, and the other in the possession of the new works boss, so that anything that needed to go from one to the other had to have both key holders. So you couldn't get somebody from here just thinking, we'll go to Tanygrisiau tonight or whatever, you know. So this was well, effectively in today's parlance, this was a construction site. Here's a good example of what we called new track, because in 1981 I think we started laying the track here up from Tanygrisiau to Blaenau, with good second-hand £75 a yard rail. You can see the evolution here. Initially it was laid straight onto the sleepers with screws and clips to hold it. They were cheap and not particularly good, but they got the job going initially. And it's gone through another 2 stages here, as you can see from the patterns on the sleeper. They then had a pressed steel base plate with pandrel clips. They proved latterly to be starting to fail because of metal fatigue as the sleepers got a bit softer, and now they've just recently been fitted with brand new base plates, inclined base plates. We call them inclined. Effectively they tilt the 2 rails inwards
Slightly.
so that the theory is they match the coning on the wheels. And the theory of that also goes as far as saying that if the curve was perfect and the wheels were perfect, the coning would allow you to run without flanges. But I don't think we should try it, really.
Maybe not. We'll risk it. So this is the bridge that wasn't there, is the sort of middling point between the track that we've just walked up from Tanygrisiau and the track that was built down from Blaenau. This was sort of the middle point, because it wasn't here.
That's correct, it wasn't there. It was, way back in the history of the thing, it was a very low bridge, obviously on this little narrow road. Believe it or not, there used to be a level crossing just about there, and you see the remains of it coming up here. It must have been very, very steep. And, I doubt whether even motor vehicles would have used it. But I think what they were faced with was this very, very low bridge, and quite a bit of developed housing up there, a nice little community, and the realisation they couldn't get an ambulance or a fire engine up there. So way back in sometime after the railway closed, the council removed the old bridge, and on the understanding with the railway company that if we ever reopen the thing to Blaenau, the council will put it back. And I'm sure they thought we're pretty safe on this one, because this must have been around the first days when the train started running way down the Portmannock end. And then the power station popped up, and obviously to the world there was no chance of a train ever coming up here. It was a pretty safe bet, wasn't it? And I think they probably got a bit of surprise when one day somebody came and said, can we have our bridge back, please? Because we've got trains round the spiral and we come up to here, and so here was this gap with no bridge. The way they managed to be able to put it back was by then, from back at the Stolen Road crossing, they'd made a road up through to the village up there, which they could get dustbin lorries, fire engines and whatnot. So this low bridge wouldn't be the problem.
Yeah.
So this, what you see now, which is nothing like the old bridge, it's a mighty great concrete thing. Contractors, can't remember which contractors, but they worked from the base where we just come from, where we used to get the ballast in.
Yeah.
Before we really laid the track up to here, obviously, to put this bridge in so that we could lay the track. But in the meantime, from Glan y Pwll, which became a depot up that end, the Blaenau end, in 1974, the old track from there down as far as the missing bridge had been lifted. Sold most of it, well, quite a high proportion of bullhead actually, which we recovered and used it for replacing doublehead down on the Ffestiniog before we got into mass flat bottom new rail.
Yeah.
And so new track was laid all the way down to just behind us here. I suppose to show intent that we weren't just saying, can we have our bridge back, just to be bloody minded. We got track approaching from both sides, and this was the missing bit.
Missing jigsaw piece.
Interestingly, them having done that, just new sleepers, new rail, new track, no ballast, that was all to come. And then what we'll see a bit further up, just in the distance, you can see the track disappears round to the left there, Ymlaen. There was a pretty major collapse at the bottom of the rock face, which caused massive works to have to be done there. Contractors wanted to get their plant up to the site by bringing it up this road to where the missing bridge was, or wasn't. So the new track that had been laid, and this was the first time I, from the operational part of the railway, came across the missing bridge to lift the new track back round beyond Ymlaen so the contractors could work on it. And I have to admit to lifting it a little bit further than I was instructed to, because it suddenly occurred to me if I lifted a bit more, it made about a quarter of a mile of rail, which would fit nicely down on Ffestiniog between Caimar and the track up into the woods, where we'd relayed here and we'd relayed there, and this bit would just fill the gap nicely. I was accused of stealing it from what became my own railway anyway. Bit of a joke. So anyway, we ended up with this bridge. The signs on the road say low bridge, 7'6", I think it says, but it's actually about 9 foot. 9 foot something rather. There was something went on then that I didn't fully understand, and I strongly got the impression when I realised this bridge was much higher than it was meant to be, that there was some connivance between the council and the railway to put it higher anyway, but it left a big step down here, which was solved by somebody paying for about 200 tonnes of ballast to make a nice level bit rather than the trains don't like steps. Even though this was higher than it was signed, one day a van came down the hill here and tried to get underneath it, and if you look underneath, this mass concrete is chamfered up at the sides, and he got underneath it and wedged. And he must have gone down on it, and he burnt his clutch out trying to get out. He had to be towed out. And nobody told us anything about it. I happened to find out by gossip sometime later that this had happened. But unfortunately, this thing is pretty well solid, immovable. Maybe if the dust cart ran away down the hill, it might try and move it.
Where we've walked up to now, there was a lot of issues with the retaining wall and having to build butchers to make sure that the rocks or anything didn't actually fall down on the houses below, because as you can see, the railway is sort of very much sat above the houses up here. It's rather similar to Penryn, which you're quite familiar with. I don't know, I can't remember the problems around Penryn. I don't think they were particularly huge, but the scale of it is different here. Everything's much bigger and there's more of it.
Yeah, the stretch we just walked up, to start with, most of the coping stones were missing.
Ah, right.
I suspect probably over the years of children playing up here, they pushed them down. And as you can see, there are loads of houses down below who were rather concerned about the railway reopening and running trains sort of above the house, bearing in mind there hadn't been any since 1946.
Yeah.
And new generations grown up. And we had then, I think they called it job creation scheme, which employed quite a lot of local people, amongst whom were quite a lot who were pretty good at the ancient art of dry stone walling. I'll have to admit it wasn't all dry stone. Quite a lot of the remedial work on this bit had a fair bit of more to put into it, but all the facing part of it was left to look like dry stone.
Yeah.
Big buttresses holding buttresses up. For some time after we opened trains up to here in 1982, we monitored this particular bit. And lots of little monitoring things glued to rocks, and every now and then, twice a year I think at one time, a guy, David Fuller, known as Fluff, who'd been big time involved with this restoration of this bit and the next deviationist.
Yeah.
He'd come down from time to time because he worked for the big railways, and he monitored the whole lot. We kept a record of it, and we know these things breathe, the stone wall things, between hot and cold, wet and dry. But it showed overall there was absolutely no cause for alarm, which is fortunate.
Which is always good.
We've done it in a few other places as well, and here and there there's a few not too good bits, but we've never found anything where the monitoring indicates it's deteriorating.
Yeah.
Probably because we haven't done it over a spell of 50 years or something, you know. There's some interesting things here. This one, from my recollection, this massive buttress, which if you view it from the road is enormous, massive thing, was already here when we started the work to reopen the thing.
Yeah.
But there was a big gap down the railway's retaining wall, and that which was meant to be holding it up.
Right.
Because it seems the whole thing, probably by its own weight, was toppling outwards. And it, again, as far as I recall, it was underpinned, not as part of this, what we call the Penlan project.
Yeah.
Because that arose, another one of these disasters in a way, with collapse of rock right down the bottom. And there was some houses down there, and there was a footpath round behind them, and one of the bits of collapsing rock apparently knocked on the back door. And me and Alan Garraway, who's general manager of the day, we got called out by the police, I think it was, in the middle of the night, torrential rain, to come up here and have a look at it. And I remember standing with a policeman and a guy from the council, I think, down the bottom there, behind these cottages in the pouring rain in the dark, looking up at those bits of rock, and we were actually looking at the rock face going up. And because the rocks all, as you can see from looking at, you know, the lie of the thing is tilting inwards, which is fortunate. And at the bottom of it, quite clearly, it had been kind of undercut probably when the houses were built, because this would go back a long, long time when they'd be building these cottages, I suppose, for the people who worked with the slate industry. And you could even see it had been drilled in black powder probably, and you could see the half rounds in the rock that we were looking at above our heads. If we'd had digital cameras in those days, we could have taken loads of pictures, which we would do today, but we didn't, so we haven't got. And about an hour after we'd left the scene, apparently, precisely where we'd been standing, a great load more of it fell down, and with it went the evidence of all these things. And bearing in mind again, there'd been no trains since 1946 along this line, so The oft-stated thing, oh, it must be the railway because it's on top of it. It couldn't be.
Yeah.
But the problem was it was undermined the bottom of the pile on which the railway stands.
Yes.
And therefore this massive project, I can't remember which one of the big contractors did it, but it was a massive job, huge great scaffolding, elevators to get up to it, loads of sandbag shuttering and backfilling into all the little crevices and everything on the rock face.
Yeah.
And then both below and above the railway, loads of rock bolts. Some of them, I believe, are perhaps even 6 metres long.
Yeah.
All going into this rock face. Very big, expensive job.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of us at the time thought, oh, crumbs, this is a bit of an overkill, perhaps, but then we're not geologists.
Yeah.
We did consider, and we even did a little bit of surveying, because of it's been on this sort of right out round the headland and teetering on the edge of making a tunnel through there.
Oh, right, okay.
Which wouldn't have been very long, and seeing as we'd not long before made the Mulwyn Tunnel and done a lot of work on Garner's Tunnel, so it wasn't an outrageous idea. But then all this had to be done to stop the whole lot eventually falling down anyway. And you can see the way it was done. You see in places, old goods yards, coal concentration places and whatnot, you'll see quite a lot of what look like big concrete fences. Well, they're L-shaped things. And so we used a lot of them on this to get the foundations of the thing and then build the track up on top of it. And I mean, actually it's turned out a good, stable, it's one of the sharper curves of the railway. It caused a lot of problems at one time, but it's stabilised, and it's not particularly one of the problem spots, except like similar places where the sun's on it all day. As the sun goes around, it follows a curve round and it reflects off the rock, and the rock absorbs the temperature. It's pretty prone to thermal movement.
Yeah.
But as long as it breathes in and out, rather than all push out in one place.
Yeah.
And the troublesome bits will all push out, maybe on a rail joint, and then when it cools down, that won't come back. It'll pull flat either side of it.
Like a 50 pence
This one doesn't do that. It just breathes. If you look at it, you'll see the loose ballast around the sleeper ends that show where it moves.
Yeah.
But it's, a score of 1 to 10, it's probably in the bottom third of the problems.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, which is good. We did a lot of work on it to get on top of it. Like we said earlier, the old company's bridges that we had to rebuild. Considerable expense, but they're all volunteer projects. This particular one, interesting for several reasons. One is, you can see the remains there. There was a ramp up from the village, a long winding footpath, and a big stone-built ramp that collapsed. And one day it wasn't there, it was all down there, and bits went tumbling down. And that seemed like one of these huge insurmountable problems for a moment, until we did a bit of investigation and cleared all the debris and muck. And what we discovered, fortunately for us, was that it was a total freestanding construction. It was not tied to the railway in any way, it was just abutting it. And what it exposed was one of probably the most big and solid retaining walls in this whole area.
Which I bet was quite a relief after looking at that. It's got to be quite a concern when you see something's fallen down so close to the railway. You do wonder, is that attached?
And after the problems that we had further back down there with all these retaining walls, it was quite a relief to find one that A, was nothing to do with us, and B, the railway was good and sound.
And solid.
Interesting area. You can see, you look around, there's this bit here that I've never quite understood why it was like this. There's obviously been some sort of structure there with the stones in a line. There's another pair of gate posts down there. There's evidence further up there of more old abutments and earlier bridges.
Would that have had something to do with the houses that were around here previously?
It must have been. Yeah, you can see the remains of one there, there's several. There, if you look on an old map, there's quite a lot of them. A bit further up, just out of sight from here, is one of the, there's many underpasses that used to all be stone slabs, quite big slate slabs. Good, substantial things, but in this modern age, you can't run trains over stone slabs that you can't prove how strong they are. I think so. They were all rebuilt. We'll probably have a look at one of them a bit closer, further up, and see how they did it actually using concrete sleepers to make a deck, and then concrete on top of that. So probably we could run a British rail engine over here if you can actually get the gauge right, without the bridge collapsing.
Well, we've got a better view up here of the ramp that we spoke about when we were down there, as we're now on top of
we were up here and not down there when that train came.
Yeah, that's quite handy. We could get smoked slightly. But not only have we got the view of the ramp, there were some cottages that were just down there, weren't there, that have actually gone to Llanberis for the Welsh Slate Museum.
Yeah, they're like the bottom of this path that zigzagged down there.
Yeah.
And the path went kind of round the back of them. But quite why they decided to take them away to Llanberis, maybe they weren't too good, they needed a lot of money or whatever. But yeah, you can see they butted straight onto there, and it's just a row of 4 of them, and you can see them today, you can go in them. The Llanberis, the Slate Museum, where the huge great water wheel is. Fascinating place. Get a better view up here as well, don't you? You see all the various entrances and little gate posts, and there's more of them sort of behind us. There's another one, and I think there was another bridge here somewhere. Then a little wiggle, Edith's cottage just on the right there, where you can see a hedge just as the track disappears. And we always used to say to her, we'll cut the hedge when it needs cutting, don't you do it, because she was a rather big lady. And every time we came up here to cut the hedge, she'd been over the wall, on the track, cutting the hedge. But she never got caught by the train, so why worry? Just out of sight, up there, just as we go into a left-hand bend, I remember walking up here with my mate from school in the mid-1960s, I should think. Like everybody did, we always walked the line. Everybody walked the line to see where it went.
Yeah.
And there was a bit there where a big boulder had come crashing down from up there. And it had landed and it bent the thing so that this rail nearly met that one. And I remember in my ignorance, because it was ignorance about these sort of things, they'll never run a train to Blaenau Ffestiniog again.
Yeah.
Because look at it, and the big boulder and the rails are all bent. Little did I know that one day it would become my job to build a railway to Blaenau.
Yeah.
Just beyond that is what we always thought was a culvert that goes from this side very steeply down under the line, and Will Jones, who I worked with to start with, he told us it was actually a coal chute, because the train would come up, like the goods train, with coal wagons. They'd discharge them into this hole on this side of the line, so to go down this steeply graded chute, and there was a coal merchant down below it. And he'd presumably have it all in bunkers and bag it and everything. Just one of these little gems that can so easily get forgotten.
Now, to me, that doesn't look like a typical concrete structure that you'd find on an underpass. That, to me, looks like a group of concrete sleepers used as the roof of an underpass.
Yeah, that's about what it is. I don't know whether this method's been used on other railways. Perfectly good one. The sleepers, I think, probably came with second-hand lots of rail, came from MOD when we bought these. And so we could get them more or less for the price of transporting the things. They were an embarrassment to them, really. And so we had a lot of them hanging around. This is, say, typical of several underpasses on this project Blaenau, and the rest of the railway for that matter. But this was part of the project setup that one, I think it was the Sheffield group, did a lot of these. So they kind of bought the contract, if you like. And every month when they came down, they'd work on these because they were stone slabs. Some of them not particularly good, others massive, but as a general thing, you know, nobody could really calculate and state that this thing was fit for the next 100 years, although obviously they were. So they were taken down, the concrete sort of bearings cast in place, and the sleepers put upside down, and a concrete pad put on top, and then ballasted over in conventional track. Very, very cheap, very effective job.
Recycling?
Yeah. Quite who uses this, obviously somebody does. There's derelict houses all along here, but there is a path goes back over there, same way as over the footbridge here, and up to some cottages up there, so it's probably a shortcut for them.
Or dog walkers.
So, there's one further up where the footpath was closed, so we walled it off on this side. When we went to inspect it one time from the other side, got in it, all slimy and wet and horrible, and 2 armchairs in it, and obvious signs of inhabitants. So I suspect the youth of Blaenau were popping down there in the evenings for whatever the youth of Blaenau gets up to, you know.
This is the footbridge and the next one along, number 3.
Yeah.
And very sort of similar to the other one, we've got an area that looks like it's been somewhat landscaped and something's been demolished.
Yeah, now that's an interesting tale. I'm not sure how much I should tell you about it, actually, because some of the players are probably still possibly even employed. There was the remains of I think a twin cottage down here that abutted up against the railway, and at some stage many years ago it had been demolished and left a back wall, and there was a significant gap between the railway and the back of the house, and eventually the council decreed it was a dangerous structure and had to demolish it. So we talked with them and said, well, we're not sure how it ties in with the railway's footing, so we will need to take it down very carefully. So they took it down very carefully until the lorry was full of stone. They said they'd have to find somewhere to dump the stone. I said, oh, we could use that. So I went with the lorry up to Glan y Pwll, dumped it there, and by the time we come back, they'd ceased doing it carefully. They'd gone straight in with a bucket of this 360-degree thing, torn the rest of it down, and pulled half the footings of the railway embankment out with it. And the man says, you've got a problem, he says. There's a hole under your railway. And I said, yeah, you just made it, haven't you? Anyway, the outcome of it was that they just finished the job and packed up and went. So we were faced with this unsupported chunk of railway. So we built up. You can see like there's a retaining wall along the bottom, and we grouted the whole thing. Made it probably hugely stronger than it had ever been before. And in doing that, we tidied the whole area up, and it made a good parking place that had never been there before. The council tried to send us a bill because we built the wall on there. They said, therefore it must be ours. We must admit it's been ours. So they'll send us a bill for demolishing the old thing on our land. So I wrote a bill that came to exactly the same amount for our disturbance and all sorts of things. And whether our general manager ever sent it to them or quite what happened, I don't know, but my bill was exactly the same as theirs. And everybody was happy at the end of it. That's how it should be, really, isn't it? There's a house, it's either that one or that one, used to have a big rocking horse in the window. And in the days when the Alco used to thunder up and down here, the resident of whichever house it was complained bitterly about vibration. So all the windows shook and everything. So I went there one day and the Alco came past, and what I determined it was not vibration through the ground, but you know that sort of hum as they puff, hum, hum, hum from the oil burning, which is the pulsing of the flames.
Yeah.
Because every time the engine puffs, 4 times every wheel turn, and at 15 mile an hour it's, I don't know, is it 3.5 wheel turns a second or something. So that's an awful lot of puffs a second that the air velocity changes and the flame goes boom, 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 boom. And you get that kind of vibration, turbulence through the air, so it was an airborne one, because none of the other trains did it. Engines, sorry, locomotives to be proper. Excellent example of what we were talking about before, of the cottages butted pretty well close to the railway. Before the railway was rebuilt, this was a footpath. It was the main access to a lot of these cottages, and you know, preceding the actual reconstruction, an awful lot of work had to go in with all the local people over the fact that they were going to lose this access. And so we had to make, that's why these all had to be rebuilt and other accesses made good, and the underpasses all done up. Interesting little things about sewers in this part of the world, because there's several of them go underneath the railway. And I think there are probably more than we know are there.
Yeah.
And fortunately none of them have burst, because that's usually the way of finding where they are. But there's one a little bit further up that came in that category. There was quite a strong aroma every time we walked past there on a hot day, and it kind of led you to move a stone and think, oh, found it. Wish I hadn't. You see the railway curving its way up there. Just as it goes out of sight there, which I think we'll probably go up towards next, is the old Groby Junction, which was a branch line to a quarry out of sight behind all the trees over there. It's a granite quarry, I believe. We'll have a closer look at that when we get a bit further up.
Unlike most of the railway, we've actually got quite a wide area here of expanse next to the railway, so I'm guessing there was something here before and it's not always just been grassland.
Yeah. But yeah, this area, it was kind of a marshalling yard, I suppose you'd call it. This was Groby Junction. See the 2 gate posts here?
Yeah.
As I suppose there, at one time it would have been a big iron gate, and points back up there somewhere. And line went, I believe there was a couple of sidings here, and then it goes off down there in quite a steep ramp, turns sharply, across the river, across the road, and then off between the houses, Oakley Square, over where the main road is now. You can't actually see from there. Over there was a granite quarry.
Oh, right, okay.
And apparently, according to Tom Davis, who had been a driver on the old railway company before it closed, and then he came back with the new railway as a driver, and he was one of my old men's gang, we called them. Eventually, who, when they were around retiring time, they'd come in 3 days a week and work on the fences and the like. And they were great blokes for telling us all about the old days, and you had to be a little wary of how much you believed.
Yeah.
But Tom says he remembers driving the trains down there to get the wagons, which, whether he went right to the quarry, I don't know, we never gathered that. But I do remember him saying that you had to rush across the road to get up the hill, because of a very sharp curve and the steep gradient, with a little Prince engine. And if you didn't get up it in one go and you had to set back, there's a fair chance the engine would fall between the rails. Presumably because the track was old and worn out, and a very sharp curve, and the little Prince thing's going like that. Then it would be pushing, and as long as it kept moving, it'd be all right. But this was Tom. I mean, how often it did happen? It probably happened once, you know. But I just had this glorious vision of this thing hurtling across the road with possibly somebody with a red flag getting halfway up the hill and go, chuff, 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 crunch. And so gradually it all overgrew. I mean, it was a useful place for us to dump materials, and a place we could get clear of the line while we're constructing and everything. But then it's become a bit of a useless space, but it's part of the history of the thing.
Yeah.
some might say, oh, we should sell it and build some tower blocks or something or other on it, but you know, you can't do that. It's part of the old company. It's part of why it was here. It was here to carry the products of there and all these places up here.
This is bridge number 4 then, if my maths is right, because we've already been to number 2 and number 3. I'm guessing this is number 4?
Yeah. The last of the package of that little contract for Project Blaenau, rebuilding the bridges. Very nice they are too. We haven't had much to do with them over the years. We had to rebuild the steps a bit because you know they were slate and very well worn. This, I believe, was across here and up as a path goes off up there. Would have been a pretty well-worn miner's path up towards, I suppose, Carmarthen and all the quarries up there from Blaenau at one time, probably with hobnail boots and the slate steps, and they'd all got the sort of scalloped out. And we did a lot of work rebuilding them. There was a crossing here that served a house that used to be here, and they wanted to have vertical crossing for it, but the inspectorate just no way would they allow it without a fully controlled thing, which in today's prices would, I don't know,
Cost a fortune.
A lot of noughts on the end.
Yes, quite a few.
And I remember there was quite a lot of upsetment about it and threatening from one or two of the locals and whatnot, but problem solved and the house isn't there now anymore, so it's no longer a problem.
Indeed.
This was, I think, known as Glan y Pwll Junction at one time. And no doubt most people will be familiar. If you're familiar with the railway, then they'll have probably bought the Boyd books, and there's one or two glorious pictures from this bridge, I would think, showing the tracks fanning out everywhere around there. There's one went to the bottom of that incline that goes up there and disappears into an adit up there somewhere. The old main line kind of went straight on up there, and as long ago, buried underneath that huge great tip. This was over the bridge at one time, was double track. And here we are today with just a one track in the middle of the bridge. That bridge is an interesting one. Further up at Glan y Pwll, there's a collection of big concrete beams that at one time I think were obtained with a view to using them on this bridge. But as I understand it, because there was not enough known about their strength and the concrete strength and what they were made of, they couldn't be designed into a bridge. So what we ended up with is what guy who's, I suppose, my consultant at one time, Brian Hollingsworth, who'd been an engineer on the northeastern region of British Railways. And he says whenever they wanted to replace a bridge and they hadn't got a budget for it, they did a sort of cheap job with old rail, and they just cut up loads of old rail. And there's beams, in this case they're carry, Australian carry. Big timber beams about so by so. And then old double head rails laid across to make a complete deck on top of it. Bitumen of some sort to seal it on the top, and then ballast conventional track on top of that. Dead cheap because it was all scrap.
But very strong. The
only cost really was the carry beams from Australia, which was fair cost of course, not cheap things. Imagine on Network Rail with rivers you'll have various markings that cause alarms, or maybe even set alarms off here with floodwaters on some bridges.
I don't know, we don't actually, I suppose our railway doesn't go over many rivers where we are, but I think there's markers actually that go into the water so that when the patrollers go past they can say it's actually getting a little bit high.
With this one, it's pretty low at the moment. Nice tinkling little stream, and sometimes because it drains big chunks of the mines, and I reckon they're flooded up to a level, and then it'll trickle out, but it'll leave silt, and you'll have a sort of a little sill of silt, and then you get a few days of really heavy rain and it builds up inside until it bursts those little dams, and then there's a vast area of water, maybe only that deep, but a huge area that comes roaring out of here, and it suddenly goes a kind of greyish white and comes up very quickly. And I've always said as a marker, that pipe outlet over there, if the water gets to the top of that, then it's time they should be looking seriously underneath the bridge, because it's almost got to the level of the bottom of the timber beams.
Yeah.
And if it got to the bottom, it would start backing up and turbulating.
Yeah.
That's probably not a very good word, is it? But you get turbulence, and then the flow gets held up, and you're putting force on the things, and you're entering into the unknown, so to speak. Which I've always thought was a good guidance, but then unless you're in exactly the right spot now, you can't see it.
True.
Yeah.
And this is it, Glan y Pwll, which we've been talking about so much as we've talked through all the different volumes.
Yeah.
Finally here at the start of Blaenau Ffestiniog and Glan y Pwll depot.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to stop today, for all sorts of reasons, like I'm getting hungry. Yeah, Glan y Pwll depot was the old northern loco shed, if you like, and the big house there was a sort of engineman's hostel, because they had things based here, and the top shunter and so on. And again, according to William Jones, there's some pretty unrepeatable things used to go on up here, with the people lodging. And he even said one bloke, they were all in there, all huddled round a big fire in the middle of the winter, all the engine drivers. And one chap walked in, threw 2 detonators in the fire and went out and locked the door. But trouble with a lot of Will's tales, you never actually got the end of the story, because he either walked away or time overtook, or there just wasn't an end, because the bloke who'd done it ran before he knew what happened.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, so this place, for some time, it was like the base for the 1974 laying of the track down to the bridge it wasn't. And then as we got up here and started working up here a lot, became involved with the construction. Yeah. And then a maintenance place. But to a large extent it became the dumping ground for like everything from the tunnel, everything from Fort Lewis, from the whole of the deviation construction, everything left over from Project Blaenau
came here.
All came here, including the tumble down buildings, workshops and everything, and it really was a mess. Old Andy worked in the middle of this amazing great mess. But over the next 10, 15 years, we used an awful lot of the stuff that was here. Things like drain pipes, concrete drain pipes, all kinds of reinforcing bar, you name it, it was here, machinery. And he made it work again, used it as a giant Meccano kit in a way, to make things for infrastructure works, for culvert rebuilds, all sorts of things. We want the thing, and he would make it. And this is where he lived and worked for years. Gradually we sorted through all the stuff. And now it's gone very quiet, because sadly Andy passed away some years ago. Somebody, John Maxey from the Signals, lives in the house, but there's not an awful lot goes on here at the moment. What does go on here, really, I suppose, with the carriage sheds and everything around there, and Blaenau itself, is for another day.
It's a whole other volume.
But worth just pointing out, the sidings, when we initially built them, this turnout and that one actually were the ones, if you look at a photograph of Portmannock Station, before it all started getting rebuilt. And the Welsh Island line went off to the right to go down the street, and there's 2 turnouts that led into the goods shed. These are them. And a lot of the rail in the sidings, all the way up that siding, they were recovered from somewhere on the derelict Welsh Island at some time and laid in the middle of the cob. About a few hundred feet of them. We took them out when we relayed it, brought them up here. Never wasted much. So I think, there's a train coming. So
a good point to end volume 4.
Yeah, we just watch this train, wave at the driver, wave at the people in the observation car, and go home.